Today we're going to try to look at the supply and demand model to figure out, well, what it's telling us. So let's just start with the picture. The supply-demand model is a way of determining the price and quantity in a marketplace. Notice on our little graph we only have two variables. One is quantity and the other is price. Now economists have messed everything up, and our independent variable in this model is price. Our dependent variable is quantity. We owe that to Alfred Marshall, a famous economist from the first half of the 20th century. Well, let's look at demand. Now in your book you see demand as a downward sloping line. And that demand shows us that, based on the law of demand, as the price decreases, the quantity of a good will in fact increase. And we all know that. I remember when hamburgers were 10 cents a piece, we'd buy a dozen of them. $1.25 was pretty good back then for feeding an entire family of 5. That's 2 hamburgers a piece. Nowadays, with my favorite hamburger being, well, about $6, I usually only buy one. But we see the quantity and price varying. This entire line is demand. And any individual point is just a part of that demand. This point, for example, will indicate that price, call it price 1, that quantity 1 of that particular good will be purchased. Well, let's add in the supply. Now, supply represents the ability of the marketplace providers to bring that good to the marketplace. The demand represents the ability of marketplace purchasers to take that good from the marketplace. And when we have a supply and demand with a market in equilibrium, the price will exist at the intersection of supply and demand, and the quantity will be determined by also the intersection of supply and demand. Now, this is what we call the competitive market. And in your book, you'll see some of the criteria for a competitive market. First of all, a good for which there's no market power. The supplier can't dictate what he's going to charge like he might in a monopoly or in a very strong oligopoly where there's only a couple of 3 major players in the market. The good is probably homogeneous. That which is provided by one provider is indistinguishable from that of another. If you think of a bushel of wheat, it's hard to tell one bushel of wheat from another. I know there are some wheat experts out there that will tell you, well, this is better wheat than that. But in the basic story, a bushel of wheat is a bushel of wheat. So here we have our competitive market, and you can review other criteria in your book about what structures this competitive market. Okay. And this will determine the price of the market and the quantity. Now, sometimes things can change. Demand can change or supply can change. And your textbook gives you what I call demand shifters, things that will cause the demand, the entire demand curve, to change. Let's say, for example, that we have some food item and all of a sudden the Food and Drug Administration comes out and says, eating this particular item will improve your health and your vigor. So what do you think is going to happen to that good? The demand is going to increase, and we represent an increase in demand by shifting the entire demand curve to the left. Now, notice, if this is a competitive good, this shift in demand will move the price up, and it will also increase the quantity. Okay? And that's what we have for a demand shifter. Those demand shifters, again, are listed in your books. Some of them include income, Increases in income can cause demand to either increase or decrease, depending on the type of good. For example, back when I was in college, I ate a lot of Spam. That was, I guess, the ramen noodles of the day. And as soon as I started earning some income, my demand for Spam dramatically fell. It decreased. Yet, my demand for T-bone steaks increased. So, income can cause demand to move either right or left, increase or decrease. Preference is a very strong mover, as well as expectations. If I expect some good to do really good, the demand is going to increase for that good. Or if my expectations for a good's performance is diminished by, say, bad reports from the Consumer Reports magazine, my demand will decrease. Just note what happened to the Ford Explorer several years ago when they had the tire problem, or other things like that. When the price of a related good changes, the demand can change. And all of that works the same way. Just recall the impact on the price of gasoline increasing a few years ago, and then the demand for large SUVs decreasing. Hence we have the demise of the Hummer H2. So there we have a very brief discussion on the supply and demand diagram. It is the essential model for understanding how economics works to explain the marketplace. Thanks.